So I'll give you I'll do a little cue in.
The Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium presents Transforming Guyana. In each episode, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis will tackle a different area of interest for transforming Guyana.
Well, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to episode 11. Yes, it is episode 11 of the Guyana Business Journal and Caribbean Policy Consortium webinar series, Transforming Guyana. I'm Terrence Blackman, Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York. And as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, David Lewis, Dr. David Lewis, of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and Manchester Trade Incorporated. As we've been asked on a few occasions, what's the vision of the GBJ and the CPC webinars? So we want to be a place for innovative and practical recommendations that really advance three broad goals. We want to strengthen the Guyanese democracy. We want to foster economic opportunity, social welfare, security, and opportunity for Guyanese. And we want to see a secure, open, safe, prosperous, cohesive Guyana in which all Guyanese, irrespective of race, class, ethnicity, religious persuasion, etc., share equally in the patrimony and the economic prosperity of Guyana. This particular series brings together experts and prominent voices from Guyana, the Caribbean, and the diaspora to discuss the impacts of Guyana's oil and gas development. We aim to offer a nuanced look at the opportunities and the potential pitfalls ahead for Guyana, and we want to explore some strategies to maximize the positive impacts that the oil revenues can have on Guyana's people in future, while mitigating some of the risks that other countries have faced in similar circumstances. Today, we want to discuss, in a sense, empowering the future. We want to talk about Guyana's youth and the oil and gas economy. As many of us know, Guyana is quickly becoming a key player in the global oil and gas industry. Just yesterday, Guyana's third oil production vessel, Prosperity, arrived in the country's water. And just for some perspective, because I think often we also need to give this perspective. Prosperity will kickstart the things in the Payara field as part of the Stabroek Block. And Prosperity joins Liza Destiny and Liza Unity, who together are pumping out about 380,000 barrels per day. And I think with Prosperity, Guyana will be looking at about 600,000 barrels per day in 2024. And so I think it makes it more important for us to really begin to channel that conversation around, how do the future of Guyana is the youth of Guyana. And the question becomes, well, how do we ensure that our youth will play a vital role, an essential role, a sustaining role in what emerges? And I want to leave it there, and I will make some introductions in a moment, but I wanted to give my colleague David an opportunity to say welcome.
Good morning, Terrence, and to our guest participants, Ronald Austin, Karen Abrams, and Elson Lowe. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. We've been programming on and off this session on the youth in Guyana because, as you know, you live in Guyana. every month there's a new issue coming up on everything related to oil and gas. So we've been having to balance out, but we're now at number 11 of a 12-month program of Transforming Guyana webinars, which we all agree has surpassed all the expectations, both in terms of feedback from people in the country, the diaspora globally, not just in the US, Canada, Britain, people in Germany and different parts of Europe, in Africa. It's amazing the amount of Guyanese across the world that have joined in and shared their diaspora experience and their interest in collaborating and supporting all these new developments, the challenges and opportunities with the new oil and gas economy. Let me just mention three quick issues that I think would be are really critical in terms of this discussion with regards to youth engagement and participation in the economic, political, social, cultural process of the country, and maximizing, as Terence mentioned, the opportunities and challenges to really be engaging actors in this process in all different levels. First and foremost is the issue, which is not just for youth, but across the board, all social actors in the country, preparation, the investment in knowledge and skills development to be able to engage, to be able to collaborate, and to leverage many of these opportunities and mitigate the challenges. Secondly, a strategic advocacy agenda in terms of what are the key issues for this sector, how to use that to advance those skills and knowledge resources. Third, of course, is what many of you are already doing, which is the strategic engagement itself. Activities, working with the government, working with the opposition, working with different actors in the economy to ensure that indeed many of these issues, which are germane to a large segment of the population under the age of 30, is critical and will be the future of that new Guyana, because the people who are above that age and are now sort of riding this wave, eventually we move on. But the new generation is the one that's really going to be 100%, just as has happened here with the technology generations, new energy generation in Guyana. And fourth, of course, is everything having to do with research, development, and what I've called and advocated for centers of excellence in PPPs, local partners, foreign investment partners, and really use that to advance that first issue, the preparation part, the knowledge and the skills of the youth coming up in order to make them ready to take advantage of many of these opportunities and to work together with the challenges. So with that, let me leave it to you all. We really appreciate you joining us today. Congratulations on the excellent work you're doing in Guyana, and count on us as we move forward after next month with what will be an exciting year 2 of Transforming Guyana. So Terence, back to you, and thank you everybody again.
Well, thank you, David. So today we're joined by some really, really excellent, high quality people, and so the first speaker for today is Mr. Elson Lowe, and many of you will know Mr. Lowe as the opposition leader's economic and youth policy advisor. So I want to note that he served as the State Assets Recovery Agency as an investigator and a policy researcher. And Elson is a graduate of Queen's College, and he studied political science and economics at Amherst College in Western Massachusetts, and it's a place that I'm quite familiar with, having spent a year at Mount Holyoke College, and I was quite pleased to see this. Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time at the math department there in Amherst. I would attend the number theory seminars there. So I know well of the institution and its quality. And so I know that you obviously have something important to say, and so I will give you a chance to set the stage for us. To give us a kind of scale, scope, broad challenges, overview for Guyana's youth and the oil and gas economy, and set the stage for the conversation for us. So the floor is yours, Mr. Elson Lowe.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you, you guys, and those who are tuned in tonight. Today, it is, I think, one of a great forum for us to really examine, first of all, what is going on, but second of all, the future and young people's role, and how we can see young people really be able to benefit as much as possible from the oil and gas industry. Just to kind of open the discussion, one of the things that you mentioned, that I worked at the State Asset Recovery Agency, and while there, we were tasked with, on the one hand, investigations, but on the other hand, doing policy research as to what we should anticipate going forward in an oil and gas economy, what types of corruption, what type of economy, what are the things we should look for. But in the course of all of those research, one of the things that we realized was not understood well in Guyana, but which was clear from the research, is that there's not a good understanding at all, really, of the scale of what is going on. Now, there were geological surveys that were actually carried out, the United States Geological Survey, which estimated that Guyana's oil reserves could range from a few 100 million barrels of oil, really, to tens of billions. Now, of course, we've already passed the 10 billion barrel mark in terms of our reserves. But what this implies is that we could find quite a bit more oil before all of this is said and done. And so there is a strong possibility that Guyana will become the country with the most barrels of oil per person in the entire world. And I know that might sound to some to be astonishing, but I'd like to remind them that right now, Guyana is the country with the second most barrels of oil per person in the entire world. That, to me, really means that we have to take a step back and evaluate what the future will look like and what young people's role will be in this radically different future. In fact, as we contemplate these things, one thing that I find it funny that you often hear mentioned is that Guyana will be a little Dubai, right? I don't know if you've heard that expression, little Dubai. Now, the UAE and those Arab countries, Qatar and so on, they have quite a lot of oil per person. Everybody knows that they have quite a lot of oil. But what I'm trying to get at is that Guyana has more oil per person than them. And so wouldn't that make Guyana big Dubai? Now, given that is what we're looking at, and at the start of the oil industry, earlier our host mentioned Guyana is producing 600, by the end of the year, we'll produce 600,000 barrels of oil a day. That is more than double Trinidad's peak production. If to give viewers some context, and we've only now begun production. And so this really is quite a train that is leaving the station, and it is a great opportunity for young people, but it poses some very serious challenges for young people as well. Before we get into some of those challenges, though, I just want to sketch a little bit, to set the stage, to sketch a little bit what we might be looking at if things work out well versus if things do not work out well, so that we have some perspective as to the nature of what is going on. I mean, if you look at Dubai or the UAE, if you look at Qatar, if you look at a lot of these states, the citizens, they're driving a sports car, they're living in a nice place. You imagine flashy, giant skyscrapers. You think to yourself, my goodness, you see hotels that are world class. You see infrastructure that is world class. You see them attempting all sorts of projects, such as building the tallest buildings in the world or designing offshore islands, all sorts of things you see, because of course, with that kind of revenue, those are the types of things that you can really attempt. That's one perspective on it. Of course, those countries are not democracies. So let's look at a democracy. If you look at Norway, We see again an incredibly wealthy country with a great social safety net. Women's rights are respected, but also you see that they've got hundreds of thousands of people working in the oil and gas industry or in industries that are connected to the oil and gas industry. However, you do see that there are one or two issues that we need to look closely at, such as agricultural production, whether they've been able to do that in an efficient way. And that is front and center here in Guyana, agricultural production and the future of agriculture. So when you look out at these countries, you see that there's kind of a sky's the limit situation. But really, that's the good picture. There is also, of course, a bad side of this, which is that there are a lot of countries that are failures in the oil and gas, in developing their oil and gas industry to the benefit of the people. I often cite Equatorial Guinea as the prime example of a country which has extreme levels of corruption, and in which we actually saw that as oil and gas production came on stream, as they discovered oil and they began to produce, several indicators of governance, as has been studied at length, fell. And the vast majority of the people in that country, I think as much as 75%, live in poverty despite their oil resources. And that's a country that is similar in size to Guyana. So that therefore sets the stage where if we make the wrong choices and if we structure our decisions poorly, if there's a lack of transparency and accountability, we may have a lot of oil, but we'll also have a lot of problems. As the young people say, more money, more problems. But what we're trying to do, of course, is to avoid that. And so we have to, first of all, look at transparency issues. Some of you may be looking in the media and see that there's quite a lot of hubbub over the audit of Exxon's expenses, because, of course, if Exxon inflates its expenses, then that would mean that the Guyana government gets much less revenue. And so there's concern that the government is not auditing and does not intend to audit those expenses. Of course, that would mean tens of billions of US lost over the course of the life of the oil industry, money that should go towards young people. So those are some of the issues that I think are raising eyebrows. But when you look now, I bring us now to the present. You look at what's going on in the country right now. There are other pressing concerns, such as the cost of living crisis, which has affected young people in many ways disproportionately, because younger people will have lower incomes relative to other segments of the population as they're starting out in their careers. And inflation, higher prices, affects the poor or those of lower income more than those of higher income, because they spend more of their money on things like food and don't have assets from which they can benefit. So that is a real concern. In education, there is also an education crisis in that we've got 80% of Guyanese who don't have both math and English qualification at CSEC. And many jobs, formal jobs across Guyana, call for math and English qualifications. So you don't have that. And therefore, you have about 80% of the population locked out of many jobs in the formal sector. This is extremely alarming and needs to be dealt with. And then you have a lot of uncertainties around whether workers will be imported and young people will not be trained to fill those particular spots. So that, I think, is kind of the broad perspective right now. But when we look now even more specifically at what's going on with the young people, there's been a very, very sharp acceleration in inequality in Guyana, a sharp increase in inequality. And in fact, if we look at housing, young people are complaining that they're unable to purchase housing in Georgetown. Even in the UK, which has had a notoriously high housing crisis, that's about 12 times. And this is during a period of a housing crisis. They've got 12 times the annual income the annual income of a resident is the cost of a house, and they're saying that that's a crisis. But in Guyana, this is just looking at Georgetown. In the UK, that 12 times number came from London. So let's look at Georgetown. In Guyana, in order for you to afford a house around Georgetown, which might be like let's say $60 million, it depends, of course, but something along those lines, you would have to be making over $400,000 a month. So for a young person, that's totally unaffordable, right? Totally unaffordable. And so young people have been pushed out of the city and are finding it very difficult to get their hands on assets. In fact, just speaking to young people who I know to be working good jobs, they have said they're unable to purchase assets within the city. That's concerning. Another way to look at this is to look at the Guyana stock market and to look at assets there and the inequality that has come from that. Because, of course, young people who are on the lower end of the income scale and may not be educated about assets, they have not really been purchasing stock and so on. And meanwhile, the Guyana Stock Exchange in only a few years has gone up 400%. And so you can see that some people are much, much wealthier, whereas young people have kind of been left behind. So we're seeing a situation where there's quite a lot of inequality that at the same time that we've got a limited educational foundation to be able to boost young people's incomes. Now, I'll close by saying this. Now, how do we get from here to there? How do we get from the current situation where you have various crises and various concerns to a situation where you have a wealthy society where young people are benefiting hugely? First of all, training and education. Yeah, it's been mentioned earlier that we need to have more training institutions and we need to have a broader base in terms of the number of institutions and the type of institutions. But on a basic level, there is no universe in which we can have 80% of Guyanese unable, without a pass in math and English, and us just ignore that problem. Now, having worked closely in the system, I can tell you one of the problems that you see is that some Guyanese young people cannot even write a sentence that is grammatically correct. If you ask them to write a paragraph, several of the sentences will be grammatically incorrect. That is not going to work in any corporate environment. That's one key thing. In addition to that, the acquisition of assets and housing is something that we need to pay close attention to ensure that young people have opportunities to acquire assets. Because if not, then there will continue to be this high level of inequality. And I think what also is needed as we build is some dedication to educating young people about corporate skills, because, of course, as we work with more international corporations, those types of skills will be necessary. And the last thing that I would say is that there's a lot of scope here for deliberate government intervention. One of the things we've talked about in the opposition is that we should be giving 50,000 Guyanese a $50,000 a month student stipend to pay for their education expenses. And the reason we say that is because we need to incentivize Guyanese to go back to school and to study. But also because we recognize education has its costs. So from that perspective, that's one of the stepping stones that will help us to deal with the education crisis that we see in Guyana. Of course, making the University of Guyana free is another low-hanging fruit, as well as developing other institutions to that end. We've also talked about salary top-ups, which of course would help by giving some funds every month on top of people's salaries, would help to deal with the sharp inequality issue. But the point of what I'm saying really is, if we make poor choices, we could very much end up like an Equatorial Guinea, where we don't really see any progress on a lot of these issues. But if we're thoughtful, if we recognize the types of challenges, and if we design specific interventions to deal with those challenges, we can move from being a country where there's a lot of anxiety about the future and 80% of people are effectively locked out of desk jobs or formal jobs. We can move from that type of a society to a society in which young people have tremendous opportunities and capacities. And as I close, because I think I'm out of time, I have
don't be no rush. I think it's important to, so take your time to.
Well, I'll close with one other point, which is that now we've also seen that in terms of entrepreneurship, a lot of young people take an interest in the oil and gas industry, but many of the opportunities in that industry are capital intensive opportunities. And the question is whether young people will have access to capital to grow their businesses and to expand. What we've talked about in the opposition is making the Small Business Bureau far larger than it is right now, maybe as much as 10 times as large, to provide much larger grants to much larger, wider range of people all across Guyana. That's one thing. We've also talked about the need for a national productivity bank to offer low interest loans to businesses to allow them to expand. Of course, young people who have businesses will be able to access that. Those are the types of things that are required for young people to meaningfully participate when it comes to entrepreneurship and the oil and gas industry. If we don't provide them with that opportunity to scale, that opportunity to compete, that opportunity to build their businesses, it'll be very difficult for them to be able to compete with any corporations that are established, larger corporations, and even local corporations. So we need to ensure that bright and innovative young people have access to capital. And I've spoken to several of them who have said that they're very pleased to hear about that type of an initiative. And I know I said the last thing, but I'll say one last, which is that we find that in Guyana, we do a very poor job of allocating our talent. We will often have people complain that having graduated from the University of Guyana, they're unable to find a good paying job. They feel that they must migrate. We will often see that some of our best students may not be able to find a good job. This is something that we need to deal with. And what we've said is that for every University of Guyana graduate who is unable to find a satisfactory job, we will hire you to do analysis of the endless issues that are here in Guyana that have been neglected. Because we need to put our talent to work solving these issues and ensuring that we do not waste the billions and billions of US that are there. Now, whereas in the past, you might say, oh, it's not worth it, it's putting people to analyze how we can, in fine detail, improve these things. It's only a few million Guyana dollars here or there. We kind of have to wake up and realize that we are talking about huge sums of money now, and they cannot be dealt with lightly. It needs to be dealt with in a substantial manner by as many of our qualified people as possible. And so that's why we've said that University of Guyana graduates, if they can't find good employment, they'll be hired to help us to make the best use of the billions and billions of US revenue that we will be getting for many years to come. And so on that note, I want to say thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope that has given you, one, some perspective as to what the challenges are and the direction that we could go. But two, what some of the solutions are and how we should be thinking about those solutions.
I thank you so much, Elson. I think we're deeply appreciative of you kind of, setting the stage there. I think, you're kind of really having us take a look at the scale and really asking whether or not we make the right or wrong choices at this moment, I think is really important. And, raising the issues of, transparency, cost of living, inflation, education, housing, and sort of inequality. And I think starkly this question about this fundamental question on the entrepreneurship side, capital for business formation, the role of the stock market. I actually just wrote something about potential role of the stock market in the Guyana context. But I think what caused me a little, perhaps I'm familiar with the data some, but I think when you said it, that 80% of the entire populace sits without passes in math or English. I think that's a very stark figure, and I think that is perhaps something that underlies some of the challenges and how we deal with some of the challenges going forward. And in a way, it kind of segued very nicely into the work of Karen Abrams and STEM Guyana, because as I thought about what you said, it's clear that and I think this perhaps is the point that needs to be elicited. It's clear that, say for example, here in the United States, one of the challenges you have is about kind of increasing African American participation in mathematics, say. And over the last 40 years, one sees that, let's say doctoral degrees for African Americans has been stuck at sort of, let's say 2% of the doctoral degrees and it's been there for 40 years, and there's been lots of churn in terms of, and one of the arguments that we've often made here is that you can't do this through the regular infrastructure, right? So it's like if you want to go from 2 to 10%, it means you have to do something that amplifies it by 5 or 10 times, a factor 5 or 10, right? So if you want to go from 80 to 10, this is a big job, and you can't do this job within the context of just your regular primary schools, secondary schools, etc. You have to build up some infrastructure outside of that in order to be able to do that. And that was a point I think we had in
Yes,
mind.
absolutely. And that's why, the 50,000 for 50,000 people is specific, because we're trying to get people to go to school. But also we've talked about having night schools to do just that training, because really we need to, as a country, get everybody that we can possibly get into training and education into that as fast as possible.
Possible. Yeah. And so to that end, I wanted to introduce our audience to Karen Abrams, a renowned advocate for STEM education who has been dedicated to empowering young people in Guyana and in vulnerable communities. Her core expertise lies in the three areas that the GBJ finds very, very important: business, technology, and education. And, Karen's passion for STEM education here in the United States led her to spearhead the STEM Guyana initiative, which has helped to train STEM club leaders, develop mobile apps, support children's learning, steer several of Guyana's youth teams to participation in the global robotics. Her contributions to the field has been recognized by the Inter-American Development Bank and Tullow Oil, and together they've invested perhaps a combined close to $1 million in STEM Guyana's learning pods to support vulnerable children's access to STEM education. I should say Karen is committed to expanding the reach of STEM education beyond Guyana and into global vulnerable communities around the world. And she holds a bachelor's degree in management from Howard University. She's a Bison. So I should also give a shout out to Howard University. My son is a Howard University Bison also. And she holds an MBA in marketing from San Francisco State University. And she's currently pursuing doctoral degree in education technology at the University of Florida. Karen is one of the most innovative Guyanese in this sort of broad space that I think we're discussing. And I really wanted her to, share with us a bit about STEM Guyana and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities, but more importantly, what is it doing? And, so that people can have a sense of the work that potentially needs to be done far more intensively across Guyana if you're going to address some of the challenges that you just described. So, Karen Abrams, the floor is yours.
Thank you. How are we doing the slides?
So I'm going to pop your slides up.
Okay.
I'm going to add your slides to the stream, and so there you go.
Lovely. So the next one would be nice.
Okay.
So Elson set the stage perfectly. I was going to start with this slide, but Elson made the perfect case for why our work is so important. I think the thing that jumps out here, and I first saw this slide when you produced it in one of your prior presentations, and I didn't believe it. I realized the source was the Guyana Bureau of Statistics delivered this stat. So essentially, half of the population has completed a primary school education only. And you're looking at 25% finishing high school. And then post-secondary, 4% of the folks in the workforce. So it melds almost exactly with Elson's figure on who is in the workforce, and that 80% of the kids who continue to struggle with passes in both math and English. And so these things have consequences. And one of the things I wanted to point out is it's really difficult to fix this problem in the middle of it, or when the young people are already grown up. It's a more difficult challenge to deal with that problem. And one of the things that STEM Guyana intends on doing is dealing with the problem at the primary school level and sort of filling the pipeline with young people who are prepared to pass math and English. And let's go to the next slide and I'll explain it a little better. So essentially what's happened here in what we looked at, STEM Guyana, is we looked at what was going on in the country, and we identified an employment mismatch, not in not in numbers, in raw numbers. I mean, we have enough young people per se to work in the oil and gas or any industry here. The problem is young people with the requisite skills. And based on what Elson has shared and what you guys have discussed quite often, we have this growing oil economy. But it's not just the oil economy. It is the fact that agriculture needs talent, mining needs talent, education needs talent, the healthcare industry needs talent. All of these industries need very talented people. And so it's important that not only do we fix the problem today, we have billions of dollars today, we'll have many more billions tomorrow. We need to get enough young people in the pipeline so that when in 5, 10, 15 years, they can be contributing meaningfully to the development of Guyana. And so what we have when we did an assessment of the Guyana environment, we have enthusiastic youth, young people who are enthusiastic about technology. But for the most part, they're enthusiastic about the front side of technology, the nice phones, the nice tablets, the shiny TVs. And so our goal was to get them to think a little bit more about what is behind that, the shiny technology. What is behind Facebook and WhatsApp? How do you create that? How do you think about that? Because that's exactly where the wealth and the opportunity really is for the future. And so one thing we recognize, and we're firm on this, there is genius everywhere in Guyana, in every community. I don't care where it is. There is genius everywhere. And so our goal is really to bring opportunity to that genius. We believe that our children need the requisite skills to make significant contributions in the future. And that's kind of what our focus is right now. And so essentially, we understand that if we don't get these kids engaged, we're going to have an even bigger problem when they see more and more wealth circulating in the economy and they're unable to reach it. We're going to deal with more juvenile crime and just, the business community is going to have to get the labor, and they're going to get it somehow. If not locally, they'll just bring it right into the country, which leaves our young people at an even greater disadvantage. So the next slide. So what is the STEM Guyana model? I mean, we're essentially preparing the next generation of innovators. And, we have STEM in our name, but fundamentally, we don't quite understand or know like what the future will bring. And so our intention is to make sure that our young people will be able to deal with any eventuality of the future. So we are focused on helping to create young people who are problem solvers, who think critically, who are intellectually curious. And, by that, I mean, they want to find out the why behind just about everything, and they're willing to go research it for themselves. We want our young people to be confident, to be interested in collaborations, and to feel secure about collaborations. We want them to be innovators, with excellent communication skills. Elson talks about how many of our young people are unprepared for the corporate world. And, many of them struggle with communication skills. And so these may seem like touchy-feely things, but they're very important. And they prepare our young people for excellence in any field, whether it be in STEM or law or whichever field, entertainment. The skills that we provide them and the things we focus on will make them globally competitive, will make them excellent, we believe, prepare them for the future. And so specifically, what is the STEM Guyana model? Next one. So STEM Guyana today is 42 learning pods. And we have about 44 STEM clubs by the end of this month, April. Now, those two programs are different. The learning pods are academic focused courses integrated with technology. And that program in particular is targeted to vulnerable children. And those pods exist in all 10 regions of Guyana. Our STEM clubs are focused on technology. So one's focused on education, the core, math, English, science. integrated with technology. The STEM clubs focused on technology. So they're going to be working on AI, on Scratch, on coding, on robotics, on Internet of Things, technologies as they come up. And in addition to that, every club focuses on math. We have a math focus, which we believe to be very important. As an aside, one thing we've noticed though is we have a massive literacy issue. And so we've had to incorporate literacy in a very intentional way in both of our programs, in both the learning pods and the STEM clubs. Because I mean, you can't innovate if you can't read. You can't do math properly if you're not reading properly. You have to be able to comprehend, read and comprehend. And so in addition to our learning pods and our STEM clubs, we also develop apps. The reason we are able to scale 42 learning pods and to go as high as we want to, or 100 STEM clubs and to go as high as we want to, is because we have designed and developed the software to manage and scale those operations. So for example, our learning pod software serves up all of the programs. It keeps track of attendance. There's a prize. There's a store there where the kids can earn virtual points and then receive real prizes. So we've actually put a lot of thought into how we design the infrastructure that helps us to scale the program. And this model word we don't take lightly. We see ourselves as building a model that we haven't figured it out. We continue to analyze and revise. We study, analyze, and revise. We're constantly doing surveys or qualitative research to figure out what's going on. Is this working? How do we tweak it? So our goal fundamentally is to build a model that we can say to any government, whether it be here in Guyana or in the Caribbean, and we are talking to 2 different countries right now, countries that are interested in rolling out STEM clubs. We want to be able to say to them, here's a model that we believe works, and here's how you test it, and here's how you monitor, right? So this is what we're doing. We've implemented a STEM club coach certification process, because what we found is the closer the clubs were to Georgetown, the better trained the club leaders were, the more access to information. And we didn't want that. We want to make sure that wherever we go, the club leaders met a minimum standard, and that every child in every club across the country, whether it's in Region 1 or Region 8, had access to a high quality level of instruction and programming. And so we have implemented our club coach certification process, which is actually a 4-part process. And we essentially have online training there. We have systems training. We have the practical, they come in and do hands-on robot building, etc. And we also have a volunteer component. They have to do 10 hours in any of our clubs or learning pods before they can be certified. And so we put a call out for folks who would like to be a part of this program. We have 124 people lined up to be certified in this process. So there is real, people are interested. People want to do things, but I believe they want to understand, like, how do I get from here to there? And so we are part of just one of the many people in Guyana who are helping to facilitate some of this progress. So STEM Guyana is also the Robin the Robot TV show. We have 15 shows we've already created in season 1. We facilitate national and international robotics and coding competitions. We're growing our parent academy, where we encourage parents to learn and then teach. One of our surveys indicated that 60% of our parents weren't comfortable with 3rd grade math. And so our intention is to provide that information to them in small bits, 10 minutes at a time. You learn the concept. We don't care if it's 2nd grade. We don't care if it's 3rd grade. We don't care if it's 1st grade. Learn it 10 minutes of your time in the privacy of your home, and then work with your child on it. And so that's this kind of capacity we believe will benefit the home, the child, and ultimately the nation. So the next slide talks about what the ecosystem actually looks like, how we unleash this vision. And of course, there's the input part of it. We're looking at, we depend on funding, on personnel, equipment, furniture, locations. And I have to say that we couldn't do any of this alone. We have our partners who help us. We work with the IDB, we work with some of the oil companies have funded us, the diaspora helps us, and even the government of Guyana allows us access into the school systems where we run our after school programs. And so everyone plays a role in this. Community outreach, some of the activities we do, community outreach, I talked about the STEM clubs or the learning pods. We conduct learning sessions and we run competitions. So what is the output that we're looking for? So we are looking for an improvement in literacy. We are looking for an interest in coding skills and improvement in coding skills. The biggest thing is soft skills. With the advent of artificial intelligence, understanding the logic behind coding is going to be important. Knowing exactly how to code is going to be less important in the future. So, folks don't see it yet, but you heard it here first. What's coming at us with artificial intelligence is going to materially change things. So fundamentally, we need folks who understand a wide cross section. They need to understand a bit of math. They need to be able to communicate. They need to be able to read. They need to understand the big picture. They need to be intellectually curious and asking questions and self-confident and stepping forward and pulling their peers together to create, to think about ideas and come up with solutions. So these are the things that we are interested in facilitating, and the outcomes we expect: better prepared students, future leaders in whatever field, whether it's in STEM. I said earlier, our leaders will be in entertainment, our leaders will be in law, wherever. We expect that the young people who come through our program are self-confident and have the requisite soft skills and the intellectual capacity to be leaders in just about any field. And fundamentally, some of them will do tech startups. Some of them will work in international outsource agencies. All of them will be thinking about solving problems. Many of them will fill local capacity. We hope much more than those who do today, the university graduates who were forced to leave today. Many will solve regional problems. We expect engaged citizens and empowered citizens and citizens who are willing to work together for the development of Guyana. And so let me take you real quickly, because I know there's some parents who are going to be looking at this, or folks with questions. What does a typical club session look like? Fundamentally, the kids would come in. We have our trained club leaders to facilitate the sessions across the country. Everybody is working from the same lesson plans. And although some may be at different stages, some clubs may be a little bit behind or ahead. And so they will learn a general science topic for that session. It could be simple machines. They could learn about the brain of a robot, robotics, whatever it is. And then they answer some questions, that we engage them. Then we break them into groups. And some groups will start working on coding or something in artificial intelligence or robotics. And some may work on their 10-minute math lesson. And so after that, they switch. So everybody gets a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then right after that, we go into, okay, let's create something. So for example, if the lesson for the day were about simple machines, then perhaps the challenge for the day, the building challenge will be, let's use scratch coding to build an example of a simple machine, like a lever or a pulley. So they'll build like a seesaw or something. They'll code out a seesaw, or they'll build a seesaw with their robots, with the robot kits, and automate it. So we are essentially trying to use the technology to engage them, but make sure that that technology is integrated with the academics. And the fact that they come and show up and they're excited, we give them a 10-minute pill of math. And all of this, we believe, is integral and essential for the development of our young people. And on the side there, this is essentially our system, the system that we use to manage the clubs. And on the bottom where it says lessons, you'll see all of the lessons that every club leader can open up, and every player can see what the new lesson is for the day. And so the next slide. So this one was particularly concerning. And the one thing I want to point out there is in the last column, 2021, if you look at the difference between the proportion of youth, 15 to 24, who are not engaged in education, employment, or training, not. For men, it's 39% as a percentage of youth, 38% as a percentage of youth. So 38% of young men between the ages of 15 or 24 are not engaged in education, employment, or training. Now that number for young women is 61%. 61% of young women are not. 61% of young women between the ages of 15 to 24 are not engaged in employment or training. So that's problematic. So let's see the other slide. So because of that 61%, I think it's important to highlight why the power of technology, the next slide, is important in the hands of girls. So all of the research says that technology in the hands of girls helps to create healthier families, a reduction in teenage pregnancies, improves economic development, simply because girls are half of the population. And so you can't optimally develop an economy in a small society, a tiny population, and then have a significant portion of your young people not contributing to the development of the country. So it doesn't make sense. So when you talk about low-hanging fruit, that's where you want to go right away and just fix that. Make those numbers similar, and right away you have some improvement in development capacity. Technology in the hands of girls helps to break the cycle of poverty, helps to solve problems affecting community. And again, girls make up half the population, and it's just the right thing to do. The next slide. And I have 2 more slides here, so I'm almost
finish. No, finish with yes. Okay. This is quite good.
Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier. I spoke a little bit earlier about monitoring and measuring and why that's so important. If you're building a model, you have to constantly monitor and measure. To reiterate, we do not profess to have the secret. To have the secret sauce to fixing this issue. What we know for sure is we're working on a model, and we've seen progress, and we continue to monitor and measure. So we have an automated assessment system where our young people take assessments in math and English, and those assessment questions are categorized. So as soon as they complete those assessments, we know which students are struggling with percent, with sex, with verbs, adverbs, whatever. We can tell immediately. And so essentially in particular pod, we can say in a math session, we essentially have the ability to say, okay, the 5 of you will work on percentages today, and so on. So that is the goal behind the automated system. And also it's based on the Ministry of Education's assessment. And so we also do club leader surveys. So we survey, like, is the Scratch working in the learning pods? Scratch coding system. How are the students, are they able to learn the way we're teaching it? What do we need to do to tweak it? Do you see improvements after this tweak? Raffle Game is our literacy app. Is it working? Are you seeing improvements in the students' recognition of words and letters and things like that? And then, of course, we keep a close eye on attendance. And attendance is critically important. Attendance also has a correlation to snacks as well, and to the engagement, to the robotics engagement. So these are things that we look at and we try to find. We know correlation is not causation, but if the two are moving together, we're excited. We can manipulate one and see what happens in the other. Yeah. So we also get parental approval to look at report cards at the end of each term. We are not interested in playing the you're first, you're second, you're better, you're 80, you're QC, you're this and that game. We are looking for, if you had a 38% 36% overall score last semester? Is it 39 this term? That's what's important to us, how well you do compared to what's the progress? What progress have you been making? We also have evaluators in every region, and they essentially go out to the clubs every other month and they complete surveys. They're not affiliated with the clubs. These are independent people, and they give us feedback and tell us, were the kids engaged? Was the place clean? Were the kids reading? How was the internet? All of these factors that we monitor and manage. So we find that that's necessary because we're managing so many different locations. And again, we do qualitative research, and we are going to put a formal M&E process in. The next slide talks about our achievements. We have done well at our international robotics competitions. Our growth is solid. We have good interest from parents, from children, from community persons. We have solid experience in technology education. We have essentially built the ecosystem for early tech innovation in the country. And so whenever you see a program for young people and you see robotics, you see coding and these things, like, we build that infrastructure, we build that ecosystem, and we're happy to see it grow. They're doing well. Our young people are doing well at international competitions. And I told you a little bit, Betty, about the assessments and those things. So next slide. So what are the critical outcomes that we're looking for? And they're tied a little bit to the slide you saw in the beginning, but we've already seen, we're at this now 6 years. This is our 7th year, right? So I can tell you unequivocally, we've had young people who've sat in these STEM clubs, who then have graduated who then represented the country on the robotics teams. They then graduated to junior club leaders. And now we're going to have, for the first time, a batch of our young people are going to run their own club. And these guys started from babies, club leaders. They're today 17 and 18. I just had a meeting with them last night. I am blown away. I am completely blown away. So we have seen that the model works, and we continue to tweak it. Critical outcomes are learners strengthen literacy skills, learners improve math scores, curious about technology, motivated to research, learners improve communication skills. That self-confidence that I talked about before, very important. Our young people have to be able to talk to presidents and leaders anywhere in the HMs and anyone. We want our young people to be able to be confident enough to share their ideas, because, like I said earlier, genius is everywhere. If you lock out half of the population in terms of women, or you don't listen to young people because they're young, you're actually placing yourself at a significant disadvantage, right? And so let me see the last slide, Karen. So this is to give you an idea. This is just an idea of where we are. I mean, we're in Lake Mainstay, we're in West Kanji, we're in Sophia, we're in Tabatinga, Region 1, we're in Region 9, we are in Region 8. We are all over. We're in every single region. And so we are committed to this work that we're doing. We have seen improvements in the children, and we look forward to working with more partners to make to strengthen our model and to scale this not only throughout Guyana but the Caribbean, and even in certain communities in the United States. So thanks a lot. Thank you so much for allowing me to do this.
Thank you. I think that you've just made the program for us. I mean, it's kind of, well, we've talked, and certainly Ronald and I have talked as a kind of, technocratic sort of way. How do you build the systems that are necessary for doing the kinds of things that you see that are obviously need to be done, and in a sense they can't be done with the current infrastructure. You have to build some enabling infrastructure. And I think the story of STEM Guyana has been one of building that infrastructure for doing the kind of thing that really needs to be done, as was articulated earlier. Let me introduce audience to Ronald Austin Jr. So again, in full disclosure, Ronald was came to my attention from one of my classmates who told me this is a really, really bright young man. You have to meet him. And so I, my fetish is having people around me who are bright. And so, so, so Ronald, I know has, you know, he's studied at the University of Guyana and the International University in Beijing, International School in Beijing. He's the former vice president of the University of Guyana Student Society, president of the History Society, and he's the former head of the government of Guyana's Youth Leadership Training Program. He's a columnist, a researcher, and a historian. And, you know, I want you to bring your perspective to this question of how do we empower the future? How do we, you know, if you will, the technocrats, how do they continue to play a role in driving some of the things that we've seen here from STEM Guyana? Give us kind of your thought on this.
The update that was just given by Ms. Abrams is an absolute excellent model, and it really speaks to what you can achieve if you are in a private context in which you control your own affairs with a brilliant head. If one were to transpose that into a governmental context, I can foresee it being met with so many challenges, because that, I mean, simply the mention by Ms. Abrams of monitoring and evaluation, I can tell you that once you are dealing with that within the context of government, and obviously which is undergirded by political considerations, I mean, the politicals are not too excited about those kinds of things. I mean, of course, there would be some exceptions, but very impressive what Mr. Abrams is doing. I mean, we really appreciate the fact that the likes of Mr. Abrams actually would take time to focus on Guyana and focus on our development, because persons of our ilk have gone far and beyond. But that aside, when I consider youth development in any context, in the Guyana context, and especially with oil and gas, now, for me, I think you have to have several steps in place. First, I think it's important that you come up with a developmental master plan, which would receive buy-in from the entire society. And while we do have a present development master plan in the form of the LCDS, if that very program can be sold to the population with buy-ins, it's very important. So you have to have a development master plan. And one also has to consider, in my view, you have to consider the fact that youth cannot be seen in an isolated circumstance. It is connected to your development master plan. It has to be considered an important part of that process. So once you have your development master plan and you have buy-in, which I emphasize is very, very important in our context, which we know is undergirded by serious political, ethnic divisions. So you have to have the entire society buy into this plan, and it has to be protected in some form by legislation. The reason why I'm speaking to this very important macro issue has to do with my consideration for continuity. Because if you have an excellent development master plan that speaks to youth, or maybe you have something the likes of which Ms. Abrams described, perfect model being practiced by one government. The nature of our circumstance is that when one government no longer retains power, the next government comes in and there's no continuity. The next government may say, that's not our program. We didn't start that. That's not associated with us. So we'll throw that out. We'll do this. So if you're going to have a framework within which you come up with policies directed to youth connected to a master plan, there has to be continuity. And in my estimation, for you to have that, you have to have A, buy-in, and B, you have to have some legislative protection insofar as that is possible in a Guyana context. for me, the second thing is you have to consider structure. You have to consider your structure of this intervention. And as you do that, I'm of the view that you have to do a serious situation analysis, and you have to have, from a policy standpoint, the ages of youth. You have to pin that down. What do I mean? Let me give you an example. In our case, in our 1994 youth policy, we had youth between the ages of 14 to 30. In the case of the United Nations, they do 15 to 30. In the case of CARICOM, they also begin at age 15, and they also do ages 15 to 30. In our 2015 youth policy, which I was involved in, we had the age pinned down to 14 to 35. In the case of the census of 2012, the National Bureau of Standards, they had youth between 15 to 24. My point is that we've got to have a national consultation that pins down from a policy standpoint that category of youth that we're dealing with. Because as I just mentioned, you see there's a disconnect between the Bureau of Statistics in terms of how they determine who is youth. So if I, for example, I'm looking for data to begin a program, and I look at the census of 2012, they capture those between the ages of 15 to 24. But the youth policy of 2015, that policy captures the age of youth between 14 to 35. So I think first we have to we have to have that in sync, and I think it will help us. And once you have that age, the age category, I think you're on sound footing. Now, I must mention, Dr. Black, it's very important that when we talk of youth in Guyana, we must understand that you're talking about a vast landscape, a vast frontier, the likes of which may not be possible to explore given the time that we have here. But suffice it to mention that
yeah, if
when you
I
discuss,
actually can I stop you?
sure,
When I was
sure,
listening there, that's a question I wanted to ask you. I'm going to add Karen's slides back to the thing, and when she mentioned this slide, I thought I'm going to be interested to hear what you're saying here, because this business of youth is not just like youth in Sophia and youth in West Kanji and youth in Lake Main State, but if you will, there's a different kind of sensibility, there's a different community, there's a different history, and how you design your policy. And this is one of the things that, as I've been noting the comments, I just think it's important. You've hit on something that I think we should emphasize. Many of the comments that have come in on the program on Karen's presentation hit on exactly what you're just talking about: the structure, the systems, the data, and I think that's so. Continue. Give us a sense of how that unfolds in your mind. I'm sorry, I didn't want to disturb you, but I didn't want to lose that point.
No, it's quite okay. What you said is pretty relevant, and it also gives me something very important to think about in this regard. And when we look at Ms. Abrams' program, I mean, extraordinary program, of course. But of course, from a policy standpoint, you have to, of course, consider age. You have to consider the youth from the center. Ms. Abrams mentioned at the end of her presentation about those who are not connected to education. We would call them the NEETs, or and sometimes interchangeably, you would say those who are off the grid. Now, of course, when you move away from the center, I mean, based on my experience, you have areas in Guyana, for example, where you have youth who are off the grid. And when I say off the grid, I speak to the question of electricity, and then I speak to the question of connectivity to the internet. We know that the World Bank figures say that we have 92%. We have 92% electrification, but that's another 8% without electricity. And if you go to the far-flung regions, the possibility exists that you're talking about 60,000 persons without electricity. How do you get to those youth? How do you access them? In my training programs, we had to do some very innovative things to get to the youth. So putting that in context, I'm saying all of this, Dr. Blackman, to emphasize that we're talking about a vast landscape here. You're talking about the possibility of even considering DVMAs, the disadvantaged, vulnerable, marginalized adolescents. I mean, we haven't touched on them. That specific group is dealt with by policymakers internationally between the ages of 10 to 19. That's a whole other story. You're talking about disabled youth. You're talking about youth in the hinterland, youth in the riverine areas. You're talking about youth from the center. So for me, when you're talking about conceiving youth within the context of a national master plan, I mean, if you're going to have a gaffe, if you're going to have just a facetious conversation, if you're going to engage in politicking, I mean, you can have all kinds of conclusions. But if you're speaking in a context of policy, targeted interventions that are evidence-based, I'm afraid one has to spend a lot of time really pinning this thing down to data that is going to give you specific interventions. I think the third important thing, Dr. Blackman, is that you have to make your interventions in a structured way at various levels. Your school, then you have qualifications, then you have training, and then there's entry into the labor market. At all of those levels, your intervention has to take on a different form. Let's begin, for example, with schooling. You're going to make an intervention at the level of school, and you have to consider that, you know, that age group is very fleeting. I mean, if you begin at fourth form, they're out of school within 2 years, and that is a time in which you get to them and you make your intervention in school, and all of that has to be tied towards a vision of where that youth may end up in the final analysis, connected to your development policy. If you're building a knowledge-based economy, obviously you talk about intervention at the level of school with Miss Abrams' kind of program with STEM, you know, science, technology, engineer, mathematics. So my point is, as you have your development vision, your interventions have got to be connected. If your eventual vision is a vision where you're using the revenues from the oil and gas economy to develop a knowledge-based economy, then your interventions have got to mirror that aim or objective. So at the level of school, you make those targeted interventions where you look at curricula. And as you examine the various curricula, you then align them to those objectives. Then after the youth leaves school, he or she may need to be qualified. And again, I wish to emphasize, this is a vast landscape. If you're talking about a youth from a far-flung region where education levels are extremely low, and you're talking about schooling where you don't have the kind of educational resources, both human and material, it's a major and massive challenge. If you're talking about the center, you're talking about the more endowed institutions, whether or not it's the top schools. I don't want to call the name of my alma mater lest I attract some attention in my inbox. But if you're dealing with schools at the center that are more endowed, then it's a different story. Those interventions can be very efficacious. But from a governmental standpoint, from that macro level, if you are making an intervention at the level of school, that alone, it's a vast landscape. Then you go to qualifications. How do you align the qualifications you want to emphasize with your development agenda? You want youth who are qualified in the knowledge-based types of qualifications, then you have to make your intervention at that level. Then you go to training. How are you going to train the youth at the vocational level? And I think Guyana, we don't get a lot of credit, but we have a lot of focus on the vocational level. We have technical schools, GTI, and we have great professionals who are working extremely hard. The Ministry of Education over the years, regardless of which government, they've always been good interventions. It's just a question of finance. And I'll come to that in a second and point out to you that based on my experience, we can have all of these lofty conversations. We can sit in AC rooms and discuss and come up with massive programs and policy interventions. But there's a little thing which I think matters a lot called money and budgets. When you decide at the level of qualifications that you want to pump money into vocational education, you want these technical institutions to achieve all of these standards consistent with a knowledge-based economy, when that consideration reaches the level of cabinet, you're talking about a budget for the Ministry of Education. You're talking about asking for a large percentage of your budget to go towards this kind of education. I'm afraid to say, based on my experience, those kinds of debates and consideration are not so easily done. You have political considerations that may say, what you're referring to is long-term things that may not make an impact. Now we have elections in a year. We have to regain power within 2 years. So you need $1 billion to pump into vocational education. But we need half of that $1 billion to go into programs that can guarantee us power. I am making this point to you, Dr. Blackman, to say to you that these things, we've got to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
These things sound good from an idealistic perspective. We can have these great conversations. So we must talk. It's important. I'm not against this. We have to discuss. But I'm saying, based on my experience, when you get into the rooms and you consider all of the variables, it's not an easy task. So you decide you want to make an intervention at the level of qualifications tied to your development agenda. That is also fraught with a challenge. Then you have the issue of entry into the labor market. I refer to Mr. Lowe's submission in which he mentioned that you have an issue of youth not being able to write a paragraph. He was alluded to inadvertently or directly to the question of the difference between literacy and functional literacy. In Guyana, we have a percentile, which everybody touts at the governmental level, of 92% literacy, which is accepted by all international organizations. But that 92%, that percentile, speaks to the ability to write your name, to write a sentence. When you come to the issue of functional literacy, during my time of work, I led the National Literacy Program in which we made some interventions. When it comes to the question of functional literacy, it is estimated that that would be around 40%. So 92% can write their names, but 40% may be able to write a paragraph. So when you talk about the labor market entry, those targeted interventions would have to deal with the issue of what happens to the youth when he or she enters the market. What do they enter with? And if you tie that to your development agenda, then you have to ensure that you make those interventions. I don't want to sound, Dr. Blackman, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but I've been behind the walls of the challenge, and I can say to you, it is not easy in the context where governments change so much and there's no continuity, because you can do a whole bunch of work for 4 years, extraordinary programs, and then the government changes and somebody says, nah, we don't like this. This is not our thing. We're not interested. That work goes down the drain. There's something new that springs up. So when I think of youth and I think of Guyana's oil and gas context, I think of the challenges, I think of the targeted interventions that you need to make, and I emphasize that as long as you proceed to engage in policy making, this would not be anything strange to the ears of the persons on this panel, because we all tend to have a very technocratic psychological makeup where we're anything we proceed to do, we think of data and numbers. But if we work within the context of some policymakers who are not, so prone to numbers, they would ask you, what are you talking about? The only number I know is 5 elections in 5 years. And the only thing we consider is votes and the seats in parliament. So that is the kind of context that you tend to function in.
Well, let me bring David in here. You see, because you've really highlighted for us the challenge and some of the, and it's even more because when one of our listeners noted even your functional literacy is a low bar because they want to go even a bit further to some kind of being able to do some critical analysis. So, David, give us your thoughts. It's very interesting. So pull this all together, and then I want to kind of share with the larger group one or two of the questions that have emerged in the chat box.
Thank you, Terence and Elson, Karen and Ronald. This has been excellent, and particularly STEM Guyana, I think we need to highlight as a benchmark experience and see how we can all work together to leverage and mobilize more resources and more support to make sure that it can reach all its goals. I'm just going to take 2 minutes. I think we should go to the panel and discussions from the internet, but 2 quick ones. Just references from 2 esteemed people in my life. Professor Jerry Haar, one of our colleagues in CPC, just wrote an article today in Guyana, and he mentions one of the key issues comparing situation in Maryland, here the state of Maryland where I live, and Guyana. And he said the new governor of Maryland, when he was elected, stated, "We are asset rich, but strategy poor." And Professor Haar says he thinks that may apply to Guyana unless the country really embarks on a strong, aggressive path of public-private partnerships. The second quote relates to the Wall Street Journal article last week, which was on if money can buy happiness. And I commented to colleagues, my mother always used to tell us 40 years ago as a child, money, being rich won't make you happy. Look at that poor Kennedy family, which has been so destroyed all their life. But having some money sure would help getting through life's problems and getting through things. So resources and projects, everybody has mentioned, it's critical because now Guyana is in a unique position that there are resources. The challenge is, do we manage them? Do we invest them properly to get the return on investments that's needed? Otherwise, as the panelists have mentioned, we are going to go into a dark area of countries that have had resources and did not know how to invest them and leverage them in sustainable, value-added initiatives into the future. Norway found its geniuses. Equatorial Guinea and Nigeria did not. They all had resources. So Karen's point on we have geniuses, it's a question, how do we leverage the resources we have? And I think the whole issue of pushing government, local business, and foreign business in Guyana to really come to the table with the resources for centers of excellence, STEM Guyana, the initiatives Elson and Ronald has been talking about, and really maximize those resources to leverage and to become what I call, with the new technology, equalizers. Because what's going to equalize Guyana in the world, in a flat world, is not just the money from oil and gas. It's how Guyana uses that money from oil and gas to really come up, invest in the new areas, invest in the new geniuses, and really move up. And frankly, at the end of the day, the third reference, small is beautiful, was a paradigm of development in the 1970s. And when you think of it in the global context, location of 800,000 people is a small village, a small city. There is no reason in 2020s that we don't advance with the management resources that exist globally to turn around that 800,000 unit into a great global benchmark. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so David wants to figure out how to turn around this 800,000 unit into a global benchmark. And it's clear that this will require some kind of collaborative effort. And let me take the prerogative of the moderator to raise one question to kind of bring Elson and Ronald sort of closer together. Ronald has made this really important point of the necessity for a developmental master plan, which had some broad consensus, which can be continuous over the course of some period that goes beyond an election cycle. And so his thing is that there must be some kind of legislative context for it. So as the political person, I mean, I want to ask two questions. I mean, is there a kind of broad developmental master plan for youth from your side of the aisle, and is there a kind of do you foresee some kind of legislative activity in this regard?
Well, what I would say is two things. One is Ronald would have mentioned a youth policy document that was developed under the previous administration, but also keen-eyed viewers will note that we have released a long string of specific youth proposals that we believe are vital and should chart a course, as I mentioned earlier, from where we are to where we could go, as to where we might end up. The problem, I think, at least as far as I've observed so far in Guyana, is one, when it comes to policy and duration of that policy, there is a serious concern that they are not what we call genuine actors. In that there's a question as to whether political interests are served by maintaining a population with low education levels. That's been a question that's been raised by many people over the years. That's one concern. The other thing that I would mention is that what I found to be interesting about Guyana is that it is not often that it's not always that we need genius solutions to problems, but that we need to do basic things well. And one example really is that I started this conversation talking about simple thing like auditing and checking to see whether costs are inflated and Guyana is losing billions of US. That is not some genius intervention. It is just doing what it is that the country is entitled to do in order to make the country huge amounts of money. Unfortunately, we see a lot of that type of lack, a lot of that type of problem across Guyana. Now, the issue of poor pass rates in math and English has been with us for some time. So really, we should, as a nation, come together to try and see how we can comprehensively deal with this problem. But if you do have a question of whether you have genuine actors on both sides of the table, that raises a serious concern. I'll give you a funny story. I don't know if people have been looking at it, but for a long period of time, we had around 30-something% pass rate in math. Coalition came to office and it was increased by about 10%, 43%, and so on. Now that we've got our revenues, guess what, folks? We're back at 30-something% pass in math. The budget is nearly twice as big. Same pass rate in math. That, I think, is one of the reasons that people are concerned whether there are genuine actors in this space.
Well, that's something that's coming up. So maybe I can ask. So, given what has been said, I mean, I think the sense is that there's a need for some kind of transformative leadership that seeks to build society where we can kind of minimize some of the ethnic divide and perhaps some of the squabbling around. I mean, given your time over the last 7 years, Karen, I mean, it's clear that STEM Guyana has had transformative leadership. What is your assessment of the broader transformative leadership, or the broader?
What is
Yeah.
the broader transformative what?
So I suppose my question is, what is your assessment of you know trans the potential for this transformative leadership that seems to be necessary in order to move some of these challenges forward, some of these items on the agenda?
Yeah, I hold a little bit different view. I don't believe that. I am not confident that innovation is done well through government. I just am not confident in that. And it doesn't matter which government, whether it's coalition or this one or any government, local government in the United States. I want the government to provide us solid infrastructure and to provide a level playing field and to be willing to connect in a meaningful way with innovators. So provide the infrastructure for the innovators to come in and do amazing things. I think innovators can do things and move quickly in ways that the government just can't. Um, and so for me, even I see, were it not for the international agencies and foreign companies and the diaspora, we would not exist. We would not exist. And I will say pointedly, even the local business community, I don't think they have a good sense of what it is that we do or the why we do what we do, because the history of business in small developing Guyana has always been a more present day-to-day kind of thing. We want, we're selling this today to get our money today kind of thing, and to get them to look into the future on why they must invest in and get returns in 5 years, in 10 years, doesn't make sense for some of them. Now, the oil companies understand it. The foreign companies understand why, because this has been part of the culture in some of the Western countries, the larger developing countries. They've done this now. If you meet an engineer from the United States, there's an 80% chance that he's gone through some robotics program somewhere in primary school. He's done some coding somewhere. That's part of the path, right? So here they don't have the benefit of that kind of history. And so for me, if you are coming in, if we're looking for massive change, massive innovative change, and you explained it earlier, Terence, when you said you believe there's going to have to be parallel structures that's going to have to move the ball forward. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And that's what I'm committed to. And to Ronald's point about lack of continuity, when one government changes, if you're connected into the government system, yes, you will be hurt when the government changes. Sadly, yes, if you're perceived to be connected. And so,
Well, as someone who was fired, I can attest to that.
no, I'm not saying that. I am saying that for us, STEM Guyana, we are a neutral organization and we are supported by economic interests who understand that we are making an investment in the future of the country. And to the extent that that these people are innovative and forward thinking, they understand what we're doing and they come and support. And so that's the contribution I make there. You can take from that what you will.
Yeah, so you see this, it's really rushed through the time. I just looked up at the clock and realized that we're at the end time. So Ronald, you get to give a last word. Actually, maybe we'll do Ronald and Karen a last word, and then Elson a last word, and David will close us out. So we'll take 3 minutes more, folks. Our apologies for going over. So, they want you to speak a bit more to, how you think, what are some things that this national development plan should look like. Just give 2 or 3 thoughts.
There's a model available to us, and there's always a model globally for these things. I mean, I can allude to India, for example. They have a development master plan. In fact, they have a commission that reviews the master plan every 5 years. I am not too certain if indeed it's protected by legislation. I have to check that. But they have a model that can be implemented. Obviously, they're not so well. I can't say they're perfect. They're a perfect society, but here we are quite different in how we do things. I don't know if you can just transpose the model here. But I keep emphasizing this is the fundamental problem. You cannot talk about the development plan. I mean, the last government, for example, you had the Green State Development Strategy. And then that was a massive program with 15 years of implementation, 25 years of targeted achievements. And there was an election, there's a new government, and they decided that there are fundamental flaws in that development plan. So all of the work that began within the last 5 years, that's gone. So we now have the LCDS. In all fairness, it was there during the time of President Jack Leo's tenure. And this time around, it is now identified as the model for development. And it's, you know, obviously there are some areas where the development strategy would crisscross. There are some areas where it is completely different. So now we have a new development plan that has to achieve its targets in 15 years, 10 years. We have elections in 2 years, under 2 years. Nobody knows what is going to happen. If you have a result where there's a possibility of a new government, then that government comes in and says, we don't like that plan, this is our plan. So that is the issue of continuity I speak to. So anytime you discuss what is youth, what is the development of any section of society, any program that's tied to a national development plan, and in this context, in the oil and gas context, I believe that any development plan ought to have some kind of buy-in, so that every time you have a FPSO out there and there's oil discovery or you have oil money coming in, persons in every community can say, okay, the money is going to go to this specific thing that's part of the plan that everybody buys into, all political parties. I don't know that buy-in, I don't know if you're ever going to get that. Sad to say, I'm very pessimistic on this. I don't know how you're getting buy-in with the players here. You know, people would not support your plan because politically for them it's not good, because the other side will say, look, they have no choice but to support our plan. It's the best plan. And then you end up give kudos to that government. We don't have that kind of mature politics yet. Yeah. So I let me just one last point. It is wishful thinking sometimes, but if we're going to really if we're really going to proceed along this path, then we have to consider that kind of approach, because as you know, most of the panelists would know that you're not going to get the needle moving when you talk about development, economic development related to a specific group. You're not going to get the needle moving in 5 years. You're not going to get the needle moving in 8, 10, 12 years. You're possibly going to get some slight movement within 15 years. And then you start getting some movement 20 years. I mean, if you look at countries, you look at China, for example, with their development, the way they brought communities out of poverty, obviously they have a different governmental model. There are no elections. There's no change in government. It's one structured thing. They can have development plans of 40, 50 years because there's that continuity. So when you talk about development in the context of oil and gas, in whatever context and whatever group, these things are long-term, and these things, they grind very slow. And as long as they're subjected to the vicissitudes of the 5-year election cycle, I find it very difficult to conclude that very difficult not to conclude that it is going to be a serious challenge.
Well, thank you, Ron. So we're literally on the bubble. So I think maybe we're just going to have one more. So Elson, you being the political person here, you know, you get to help Ronald to be more optimistic by committing to continuity of something. You know, give us your last thought here, because give us a positive thought to go out on.
let me put it this way, because one of the things again, simple things in Guyana we have problems with. We seem sometimes to think that these types of problems have not been problems that we've seen all over the world, right? And one of the solutions when you've got this difficult and tenuous politics is that you have stronger institutions. And so in Guyana, one of the things we've talked about is the weakness of Guyana's National Assembly, legislative arm of government. One of the things we've said is that we need all MPs to have offices and staff on both sides of the aisle so that they can conduct good research and analysis and so that we can improve the quality of debate in the country. Now, those types of interventions might help, as Ms. Dawson is saying, the politics to mature a bit so that it is not just abuse out, as many young people have complained in in the parliament, it sounds like abuse out, but rather so that we have some more reasoned and structured debate. We can even have an office in the legislative arm that evaluates independently the economic policies and ideas that different groups come up with so that the populace is given a more objective opinion on this. And these are things that we've talked about as well. And so the solution may be a political solution. That is to say that we need to strengthen what I have always said I believe is the weakest arm of government in Guyana, even though it should be the strongest, which is the legislative arm of government. I don't know if that has yielded any optimism,
No,
especially.
that certainly does. Budget office of budget and policy, like we have here, or
Yeah,
office of science policy,
yeah.
or you could, and before David, so this one just came in, or you could just have an office of STEM Guyana. The audience seems to think that STEM Guyana has done has done something right, and maybe if the government sort of puts her as the mediator to do the things in the middle, it might just work. So, David, you get the last word.
Thank you all, and particularly kudos to Karen on the statement that, if you want innovation, you don't go to government for that. So I think everybody needs to understand their space and their lane and to work to their efficiencies and to their best practice. Innovation is not done in government. Government can implement innovation, but it did not develop innovation. I think that's a mantra that
Amen.
we need to stick to that. Let me mention 5 mantras of economic and governance success that I think envelop everything we've been talking about with regards to youth. 1, transparency. 2, rule of law. 3, good governance. 4, accountability. And 5, sustainability. This is something that, with the resources that exist in Guyana now, there is no reason not to move 1,000 miles an hour on establishing those, because it will impact on everything. It will show that institutions matter as well as leadership matter, because in the Caribbean, we have a problem that we give 90% to leadership, 10% to institutions. And when something happens and we lose a leader or a leader changes, boom, we go down because we have not invested in the institutions. One quick anecdote. In the 1970s, Chile and Mexico were basket cases. And when the new governments came in, one of the first things they did was invest millions of dollars to send Chilean students and Mexican students to the US to get PhDs in business, economics, and engineering. No historians, no sociologists, nothing. Sorry, nothing against those disciplines. And those
Mr.
people
Austin, you get
came,
an attack.
those people came back to Chile and Mexico, and they are the reason those countries transformed. Engineering, business education, economics education. Guyana has the resources now. It can mine the geniuses. I laugh when I see, government is sending 30 students on scholarships. 30 students? We need to be in the thousands. And there are universities all over the Caribbean, the US, Canada, Europe that will work with us. So that is something that needs to be done. And when you do that properly, those talents come back. Yes, some will stay and be diaspora, but in the 1970s, they had to come back. Today, they may not, but we can use them abroad as well. Not everybody who adds value has to be physically in Guyana. So with that, let me thank everybody for episode 11. Wednesday, May 10th will be our final year 1, episode 12. So please join us. But good news is that GBJ and CPC have already confirmed we will have a year 2 of Transforming Guyana, and that will start with episode 1 of year 2, Wednesday, June 14th. So good work and success breeds more good work and success. Thank you, Terrence and the team at GBJ, for the opportunity for us to collaborate with you. And thank you, everybody who's participated, you three today, but everybody during this past year. It's been an excellent experience, and I hope we can leverage it to use that for continued transformation of Guyana. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
you.
Wonderful
Thank you.
conversation. Thanks. I appreciate that. It's good. Finally, good to meet you. And it's well worth it, you young man, both of you. Take care.
Thank you.